Good afternoon. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us today. And today marks maybe successful conclusion of our summer program called Global Collaborative. And also, today's special lecture is meant to give an overview of the challenges we are facing today. And we have a very distinguished group of panelists. And I don't think any of you requires any introduction. And our speaker today, Professor John Ikenberry from Princeton University, an eminent scholar of Gyeonggi University, and our panelist, Professor Kim Sung-han from the Korea University, which is our neighbor, and former National Security Advisor to the President of the Republic of Korea. Last but not least, Professor Jung Jong-pil, Professor of Politics and Economics Department of Gyeonggi University and a board member of the Korean Association of International Studies. With that, today's lecture has three keywords, as you can see from the screen: crisis, world order, and transition. And if we combine these three words, I think the image you will have in your head will be very clear, meaning humanity stands and world order stands an inflection point. And I ask AI to give us the image. And this is the image of, I think, heaven. And the other path, image of hell. Why? Because depending on the choices humanity is going to make or not make, the fate of humanity will move into opposite directions. Either continue the path of peace or downward spiral to catastrophe. Why? The whole humanity across national borders, beyond national borders, is facing the perfect storm of the existential threats. Spectre of nuclear winter is coming back alive following the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Climate disaster is accelerating, and uncontrolled, disruptive technologies are moving much faster than the norms to regulate and mitigate the risks associated with it. And that's why the bulletin of the atomic scientists, they set the clock for the last 80 years, and this year they set the clock to 85 seconds to midnight. Closest ever. With this as a background, I will move to our presentation part. And part one has two-part question, which is the liberal international order, which has been maintained since the end of the Second World War, failing? Are there better alternatives? Do you have better alternatives? And I don't think we can find any person better equipped than Professor Ikenberry who can come to the defense of the international order. Please tell us how you diagnose where we stand with liberal international order. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Rector Kim. It's great to be here and to be maybe the last person on earth who is going to defend the liberal international order, but it's part of a larger conversation I hope we have today about the nature of the global system, the crises that are besetting humanity and setting our countries, the breakdown of the international system. And of course, that is something that we're all worried about. We don't quite know how deep, how far how catastrophic this kind of breakdown is, but hopefully today we will begin to survey what's happening and what are the possibilities in the context of the great threats that the rector has laid out here. I might just start with the liberal international order, the old order, the order that we've lived with for 80 years. And indeed, that order is in crisis. The United States itself, and it's a kind of odd crisis because the United States under Trump and under the banner of America First is taking what I think you have to call a kind of wrecking ball to the post-war order, the order that it itself created more than any other country, allies and partners after 1945, the United States taking this role of building a kind of architecture for cooperation. And then Trump, under the banner of a populist vision, has been taking that order down piece by piece. And it's kind of a confusing moment because great powers rise and fall, international orders rise and fall, but they usually don't end or die because of suicide. It's usually murder, if you will. So self-destruction is an odd kind of order destruction kind of phenomenon in world politics, and we're trying to understand that. But we're certainly in uncharted territory. The U.S. role in the world is up for grabs. It's uncertain, it's unpredictable. What will the United States look like in 10 years, 20 years? But we're also in a wider kind of era of uncertainty in that the larger multilateral system, the United Nations system, the system of international law, is eroding itself. There's a kind of lost optimism in the ability of countries to work together to develop rules and institutions for common problem solving. International law itself is eroding, and I hope we have a chance to talk about that, and the United Nations. But together the United States as a kind of architect of order and this larger multilateral system are all moving in a direction we haven't seen before. The range of possible futures is as wide as they've been in my lifetime. If you think of a kind of future that could be of one kind or another, from disorder to order or different kinds of orders, that range of possibility that intelligent people have suggested may be our future is as wide as it's been since, say, like the 1930s. So we don't know what's coming down the road. Basic questions are being asked. What are the sources of order? Can democracies make a comeback? Can the US and China find a way to coexist? And the question that I'm most interested in, what is the future of liberal internationalism? That is to say, the cooperative organization of the international system, building open, loosely rule-based and progressively oriented systems of cooperation led by liberal democracies, order that makes the world, if you will, safe for democracy and safe for modernity. Where do we stand on that? Most people today look and see that liberal order disappearing. The future will look less open, less rule-based, less cooperative, more fragmented, more illiberal, more imperial even. And it's a disconcerting, worrisome moment. For 80 years, the US has kind of played a linchpin role. That is to say, it's been kind of a privatized governance provider through alliances and multilateral economic institutions and political solidarity with other democracies. And so across those 80 years, countries around the world, foes and friends and those in between the US and other countries, have made their strategic decisions predicated on the continuing existence of that linchpin liberal order. And now the US is actively undermining that order, and it's thrown everybody into a kind of strategic uncertainty. Everybody around the world, again, allies but also adversaries, are forced to ask the question, do we premise our strategies on the return of that order? After Trump, the US will come back. Do we appease? Do we prepare? Do we work around? Or do we take a more existential approach and do something new? Do we jump to a new type of order? And so I think really we're at a moment where everybody is making choices about what they think will be in place in the next 5 to 10 years. So what will be in place? Well, I would say the future of world order, as I said, could go in many different directions. One way of kind of identifying two different futures is a wonderful kind of a summary term, either a San Francisco world or a Yalta world. So the Yalta world is a world that is using the term from the Yalta Agreement in 1945, when Stalin essentially was beginning to carve up the Eastern Europe area of the Soviet area as a kind of sphere of influence for the Soviet Union, and other regions were invited to follow suit. So what a Yalta world would be: a world of fragmentation, of blocks, of zones, of pan-regions, of mercantilism, of deep disagreement, erosion of interdependence. So that's Yalta world. And the other world is San Francisco world. And of course, that term comes from the location where the United Nations Charter was signed in 1945. And that's a world of multilateralism. That's a world of a kind of new birth of cooperation to engage in global problem solving on all dimensions. And I'll just end by saying, of those two worlds, I do think that enlightened interests lead most governments around the world, and even in a United States chastened by the experience of President Trump, to a San Francisco world, a world that is premised on four convictions, if you will, that I have on the screen, and I'll just list those because I do think that if those convictions still hold, there is a possibility that enlightened governments can rebuild something that would be called a liberal international order. Number one, that openness is good. Exchange of trade, ideas of people, properly managed, is better than the alternative: blocks, mercantilist zones, and so forth. That as trade theorists tell us, it raises all ships. It raises all ships. All people who are in this system benefit from it. Secondly, that international institutions actually do help solidify or catalyze cooperation, creating conditions for joint cooperation in various ways. International institutions are a sign of the modern era. They mark what the era that we live in, and they're there for various reasons, and for important reasons, that they provide the concentration of expertise and good practices for tackling problems that all of us share. Thirdly, democracies do have a cooperation advantage. They do like to work together under normal circumstances. They trust each other, they have similar values, similar interests, and thereby they are a natural coalition to work together at different moments, as they have over the last 200 years, to build common spaces for countries to work together. And then finally, under conditions of rising interdependence, which is the feature of our current era, making decisions and making agreements that bind yourself to other countries, which does entail a cost, is a cost that is less than the gains that from coordinating your policies. Those are four convictions that I've given to you, and those are the convictions behind some kind of open, loosely rule-based order where countries come together to solve problems. Are we really at a point where we're in the face of the problems we have today, that we're going to throw all of that away? My hope is that the underlying rationality of a cooperatively organized international order still outweighs the more nationalist and ideological interests that favor alternative types of international orders. So that's how I would answer the question.
Thank you, Professor Ikenberry. And I cannot agree more with you that San Francisco world still offers humanity the best possible future. And as someone who worked at the UN, I want to see that world coming back to humanity. Because, as you said, it is most cost-effective, and I think the vacuum created by maybe retreat of American global leadership can be compensated by middle powers, coalition of the willing, able, and free can fill the vacuum. Now, I'd like to move to the second part. The question here is, as Professor Ikenberry said, the role of enlightened governments are critical. So how can we wake up governments to be more enlightened? And given the danger signals we are now seeing, nature is sending to humanity. I'll just give you two examples. First example is global boiling. As a result of human activities for the last 250 years after industrial civilizations came to the fore, now world is not just warming but boiling, including land and sea. And second image, out of 9 critical natural boundaries, 6 have been already breached. So it means humanity is ruining the natural ecosystem on which our own survival depends. But unfortunately, governments are now backpedaling from the implementation of climate agreements, including Paris Climate Accord. So next question is how we can enlighten governments and get back to the implementation of their climate obligations before it becomes too late. Maybe much more difficult question to you.
Much more difficult. If this were an Olympic diving event, what I just talked about was a 6, and this is a 9. So much more backflips and twists to answer this question. It is the big question that hangs over us. What can we do? How can the obvious, clear crisis signals that are flashing red before us in all these different areas, how can we get those flashing lights to be monitored and responded to? It's a very big question. I have some ideas, but I would start by saying the crises are multifaceted. There are so many crises, and that may be part of the problem, that we all of us as citizens, if you will, aren't quite sure what to focus on. There's so many different, it's coming from so many different directions. Even if we talk about environmental crises, where do we go? What do we do? Where is, it's a crisis that's emerging from such deep structural forces like industrial modernity. How do we respond? What are the solutions? If we do acknowledge that the crises are real, where do we channel our energy? And so this is a problem. And so the multiple crises, I've talked about this in my classes about the crises before us are threefold. A crisis of geopolitics, that's the shifting nature of politics and power in the world system, the rise of China, the global south, the power shifts that stir up, if you will, geopolitics and makes cooperation difficult. Then what I call the crises of modernity, which include all these things that come out of the natural world, the humans' impact on the world, climate, pandemic, disease, but also technological revolutions. We're in perhaps the profound technological revolution of the modern era with AI. extraordinarily subversive of the old systems and ways of life it's happening all along, and it's a kind of natural experiment. We have powerful, rich companies building out this new world, and no one knows what it's going to lead to. You kind of hold your breath and hope that AI will actually, on balance, be better than not, but no one knows. So, and then those are really the crises that then are compounded by the fact that liberal democracies, rule-based, accountable governments, constitutional systems, Republican rule, that old classical favored form of government itself is in trouble. So it is indeed easy to see that the problems are getting greater, that the demand for global governance is going up, the supply of global governance is going down. And when you look at how does crisis generate a reaction, it's worrisome because we just lived through something called the COVID pandemic. It was a global phenomenon. Everybody talked about it. Everybody experienced. I lost loved ones, elderly loved ones, because of the pandemic. So it touched our lives. But look at what the world is doing today in preparation for the next pandemic. Nothing. Nothing. It's embarrassing. Our governments are not working, are not allocating funds, not building new pharmaceutical infrastructure globally. So what does it take to get humanity activated? And so I'll just give a few thoughts, and I'm eager to hear what you think. One is, I don't think we can wait for the great powers to work together. China, US, Russia, Europe. The geopolitical problems I mentioned earlier are simply going to make it very difficult for this to be a centralized, the great powers of the world come together to protect their paternity by working to save the earth. I just don't think that's where we're going to find things. We need voices from the middle powers, from the global south, actors working regionally, building coalitions, building networks, and there you do see some aspects of that do seem to be important. Regionally, there are some efforts at not so much focused on the pandemic issue, but on other issues of multilateral cooperation, building regional forms of cooperation, working in the kind of the interstices of the great power system. Secondly, we have to depend on and hope for action coming out of that wonderful human treasure that provides hope decade in and decade out, and that is global civil society. Something that here at Kyunghee, there's a lot of study and celebration of global civil society. What is that? Well, it's a lot of things, but it includes, for example, universities. And universities have to be part of the solution. Students, researchers, intellectuals. Kyunghee, in its most recent effort to acknowledge advocates and leaders in the area of world peace, have identified the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist as a worthy recipient of that award. And why? Because that is a global civil society activity, a scientific journal with a public face trying to cast light on the problem of nuclear weapons, proliferation of WMD, scientific outcomes that can be dangerous if they are not well regulated. And indeed, there's a certain kind of hope that I would have for scientists to step up inside of universities, outside of universities. During the Cold War, one of the most harrowing efforts to bridge the East-West divide was taken place in Pugwash, Canada, where Soviet and Western scientists, primarily physicists, who had been part of the effort to build atomic weapons, came together every summer, pugwash movement, to exchange ideas and build a vocabulary about throw weight, about how to actually think about and name and measure nuclear weapons, so as to then get to the next task of regulating, controlling, and eliminating. And then finally, if I could have one more point about what can we do, I would just say that looking at the past for lessons, each of our eras of international order, 18th, 19th, 20th century eras, the dominant order that was in place in those different centuries had a kind of set of ideas that were embedded in the institutions that told a story about how that order spoke to the most basic, deepest problems and aspirations of that age. And so you have, after World War I, the League of Nations was built around this idea of collective security, that we can build a security order by looking after each other, and a kind of international insurance scheme that if anybody is attacked, everybody else comes to their aid. And then after World War II, the dominant idea behind the order was this notion of a New Deal for the world, that all people everywhere deserve to live in a kind of order that provided support for the basic needs, or what FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, called the four freedoms: freedom from want, freedom from fear, freedom of speech, and freedom of religion. So an ideology of hope that would underpin the institutions, the multilateral cooperation. We're doing this because we see a future that these ideas, this collective action will get us to. We don't have that idea today. We're missing the center of the donut. And the center of the donut is a vision of a better world, that all these activities associated with multilateral cooperation, liberal internationalism, openness, so forth, it's not there yet. And so your generation, I think, the young generation today, is going to have to help develop the ideas on what is the ultimate social purpose behind international order that can get us to a better place. So they often talk about the generation of 1945 as the greatest generation, those who stormed Normandy and pushed back the fascists and the imperial Japanese armies, the greatest generation of the 1940s. Well, given the crises today, that generation is going to have to cede ground to your generation, because your generation is going to have to be the greatest generation, because the problems are there, and what is needed is the imagination to fill that donut hole with a vision of what our collective action can achieve, and that's yet to be done.
Thank you, Professor Ikenberry, for your plea, passionate plea for you, students, our next generation, to stand up to the plate. And action must start now before it becomes too late, and we cannot any longer for major powers to be enlightened. So the gap must be filled by middle powers, civil society, and young generation. And that leads to our final part of your presentation, which concerns the rulemaking. And there, I think the problem we have now is the concepts of peace are too narrowly defined, and we have to enlarge it from negative to positive, and from state sovereignty to human security and collaborative sovereignty, and finally, from the human to nature. Unless we seek peace with nature, our peace will not be complete. So how can we push the governments to change our mindsets and approach to rulemaking? Again, floor is yours.
Thank you, Rector. Yet another important question. How can we change our mindset? How can we make rules? And it is a kind of, the deep question embedded in this is consciousness. How do we think about the world? When we look at the world, what do we see? And can we reimagine the world in a way that will be constructive, that we can see interconnections, we can see what's at stake, that will lead us to act in a more elevated way, a more enlightened way, to see ourselves as a common humanity, a common people. It was that ancient Greek philosopher Diogenes who he was met in the street by someone who said, "Where are you from? Who are you?" And he said, "Well, I'm a citizen of the world." So he was way ahead of his time. The world was yet to be discovered in many ways, but that is the spirit. How can we get there? But the more kind of practical kind of question that's being asked in this module is kind of, how do we get rulemaking? How do we get people to agree upon rules and institutions that we can inhabit and that can do things that we want them to do? And it is true that these different moments have come, as I've tried to suggest earlier, in these kind of moments of new thinking. So each of these historical eras where there have been a kind of order-building moments, if you will, typically after major wars, there have been kind of new thinking about how to organize the world, partly because you saw how the old order brought us to grief through World War. So think about the great upheavals of the 1930s that brought us the Renaissance, really, in multilateral cooperation after World War II. You had the Great Depression, the rise of fascism, the rise of totalitarianism, the rise of total war, the dropping of the atomic bomb, and the Holocaust that Nazi Germany inflicted on the Jews and others. That kind of horrific moment that all occurred in 15 years. So if you were 30 years in 1930, in 1945, you're only 45 years old. Your life is still beginning in many ways, but you've gone through this most horrific moment in world history. And it did lead to new ideas. And I guess the sad lesson is that often it is the devastation of the old that leads to the demand for new thinking, but we can hope that our generation, your generation, can change mindsets without having to go through what the generation of 1930 to 35 went through. But clearly, these moments do yield new thinking. After 1648, you had the invention of state sovereignty. In 1815, you had the concert system that was an innovation. 1919, I've mentioned collective security. 1945, this very rich, dynamic system that we've talked about, building liberty under law. So all of this is part of what we know is kind of how we get order change, rulemaking, and changes in global mindset. I would say that today, because we hope that there won't be another major war that will force a kind of moment of new thinking, that it will take place in new ways. That the old ways of building rules and institutions in history have been really of two sorts that I've talked about in my own work. Constitutional moments, such as after wars, where everything that preceded that war has been destroyed, the old order has been discredited. You have new powers with new opportunities to use that power to put in place something during a window of opportunity that will last for generations. So those are the most creative, dynamic, opportunistic moments to rule the world, to build rules for the world. But absent that, what are the alternatives? And I would say the two alternatives are what I would call coalitional rulemaking and competitive rulemaking. So coalitional rulemaking is really like-minded states work together, think big but work small, in the sense that they try to create an area where they can establish a ruly environment to solve problems they care about, and then hope others will join them. So the European Union started small, 7 countries. It became a larger entity, and it's still growing today. So expanding from a small core with like-minded states committed to, in that case, democracy, rule of law, and shared fate. ASEAN, middle powers, Europe, as I said, these are all G7. These are all areas where I think we can find possibilities for groupings coming together with enough shared interest, shared values, and trust to fight back on the erosion of international order. Second point would be this, what I just alluded to, and that is rulemaking in the 21st century is going to be coalitional, starting small, and the term I sometimes use is the ink blot strategy. So the ink blot on a piece of parchment, small, and then you can see it kind of expand out to the periphery in all directions. So I think that this is something that is a possibility. I do think in the aftermath of Trump, so that's, the clock is ticking there, so 2028, there will be a kind of opportunity for coalitions to be built. And finally, the power of optimism, that there is a opportunity to think big about the future and to don't give up on the possibility of progress. That cooperation today often depends on a certain optimism that you won't solve all problems today, but you know that tomorrow is your friend. Tomorrow is a workspace. You can work with others because they're going to be around tomorrow, and you can do things that you can't do today. So you start now, and then you work, and you come back in a year, and you start with the successes you have, and then work beyond. And so the idea is that peacemaking, order building is a process. And if I can just end with my favorite speech by an American president in the modern era is John F. Kennedy's speech at American University in the summer of 1963, before he was assassinated. He said, he was talking about practical peace. He was saying, there is no single simple key to this idea of peace, no grand or magic formula to be adopted by one or two powers. Genuine peace must be a product of many nations, the sum of many acts. It must be dynamic, not static, for peace is a process, a way of solving problems. And that's the spirit, I think, that we need to harness for engaging in rulemaking in the future.
Thank you, Professor Ikenberry. I like your idea of the idea has a big power like ink blot. It can permeate through if we can come up with a good idea. And also, I agree with you that constitutional moment of rulemaking is no longer feasible. Because if we wait for catastrophe to happen first so that humanity wakes up, maybe we don't have the future. As Albert Einstein once said, he thinks if Third World War takes place, then humanity will fight with all technologies, all weapons, including nuclear. But then he said, Fourth World War will be fought with the sticks and stones. So there will be no longer human civilization any longer. Now, with that, let's move to our panel discussion. And we have distinguished group of panelists. Here, I want to reverse the order. First, I want to give the floor to Professor Kim Sung-han and Professor Jung Jong-pil to make comments. And our first topic, I want to go back to geopolitical crisis. Because unless we prevent geopolitical crisis becoming a real catastrophe, there will be no future for humanity. And on that, I'd like to show this map I drew, showing that now global geopolitical fault lines are being activated between global East and global West. And western part of that global arc is already on fire. If that fire moves to the eastern part of that arc, it is likely to mean the beginning of the Third World War because US and China are directly involved in this part of the world. And Korea stands at the frontier of that global arc. Good case, we can be a bridge. Bad case will be the first battlefield. So I want to ask Professor Kim Sung-han to discuss how we can help US and China manage their hegemonic competition responsibly and peacefully. And what should be the Korea's role? $1 million question to you.
It's a huge question. Huge question. First of all, I'd like to thank Director Kim Won-soo for giving me this wonderful opportunity to speak to enlightened audience. I'm very glad to meet you, John, and Professor Jung Jong-pil. Actually, in February, we discussed very tangible and really secularized questions within the context of U.S. ROK Japan trilateral cooperation. But today I feel very divine, calm and solemn, surrounded by grand discourses, humanity, civilization, etc., etc. When it comes to U.S.-China strategic competition, I think this is not a war, quote unquote, that can be ended overnight. When I talk to many scientists and engineers who are working on AI and related technologies, they say it will be taking at least 30 years to figure out who will be the ultimate winner. For example, United States is working on innovation, how to move AI toward the stage of AGI. On the other hand, China is working on the paradigm of diffusion, how AI technology can be implemented on industries, military, etc., on the real front. In that sense, their competition appears to be moving toward a different direction, but at the end, they have to, discern who will be the ultimate winner. That will be the moment of truth, I guess. By the way, when I was frequently commuting between Seoul and Washington, if I may, I could see United States and PRC were trying to figure out their vital interest area and important and marginal interest areas through communication channels. Such as SED, Strategic and Economic Dialogue. State Secretary and Commerce Secretaries and their Chinese counterparts meet together to figure out their areas of interests. I think it really helped a lot in clarifying their, the stratum of interests. But now this kind of communication channel is missing. So I think it is right time to reestablish this kind of a strategic dialogues, not just state secretary level, but also defense and economic, because economy becomes security and security becomes economy. So in that sense, they need to communicate with each other how they will be managing their competition from military, technology, and economic security dimensions. From the Korean perspective, how to mitigate this kind of a strategic dimension? If I say my conclusion first, Korea needs to spin two triangles in Northeast Asia. One is AJK, America, Japan, and Korea triangle, and the other one is CJK, China, Japan, and Korea triangle. Why? AJK is a kind of a quasi-alliance trilateral mechanism in which we can deter and defend vis-a-vis North Korea and other regional threats. But CJK, China, Japan, and Korea trilateral summit is quite necessary from the perspective of non-military dimensions, but at the same time, from the perspective of soft balancing, so that United States may not impose its kind of self-interested kind of priorities on Korea as well as Japan. If Korea is not handling China factor very well, the likelihood that United States may impose its top priorities is getting higher. So from the perspective of soft balancing, if this kind of a soft balancing mechanism is really working well, I think Korea can indirectly contribute to mitigating strategic competition, because China knows about the power of AJK trilateral cooperation, and also United States is aware of Korea's location within the context of a CJK trilateral cooperation. So this kind of two triangles should be put in together so that United States and China may not just focus their eyes on the other party, but they need to take the others into account when they make their own strategic decisions.
Thank you, Professor Kim Sang-han. I mean, Korea should make the best use of two triangles we have in our part of the world. You call it AJK, means US, Japan, Korea, and CJK, China, Japan, Korea. And because if we use those triangles wisely, then we can help US and China find common ground on issues of, I think, maybe least political difference and very big global repercussions, like existential threats we are facing now. And Korea and Japan belong to both triangles, and we have to do better to strengthen, so far, I think, the weakest link between Korea and Japan, bilateral link. With that, I'd like to invite Professor Jung Jong-pil.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to this wonderful panel today. And it's great to see Professor Ikenberry and Professor Kim here, and to join this panel discussion. Well, Professor Kim already provided lots of answers, which actually have a huge kind of overlap with what I was just trying to say. But I was starting a very kind of different kind of perspectives than here. How do we prevent global division from sliding into catastrophe? Now, at here, there could be probably two kind of pillars at here: strategic restraint or institution building, what we usually say. Strategic restraint is probably coming from the geopolitical overreach and limiting each of these countries to limit that geopolitical overreach. And institution building is trying to provide a more predictable rule of road that both of these countries can actually follow. Well, these are the most general kind of analysis, or the kind of the methods most of the scholars are actually talking about. But before we go to there, I just want to raise one question. It is talking about, I really want to talk about this, is with us or against us. So kind of solving the problem of with us or against us. Now, where does this actually come from? Lots of people are trying to say this, that Thucydides trap, that was a very kind of popular kind of wording, came from Graham Allison's Destined for War book. And here is trying to say that the rising power growth clashes with the superpower dominance out there, and the kind of the conflict is inevitable. Now, all of these kind of analysis really comes from the dichotomous and the binary kind of approach coming from with us or against us. This actually came from after 9/11, I think it was September 22, 2001, the former president of the US, George W. Bush, said that if you're with us, you're a friend. If you're not with us, then you're the terrorist or you're the enemy. This is a kind of a phrase that was very famous, and at that period of time, George W. Bush was really trying to gather a kind of support for the war against the terror out there. Now, 25 years later, let's look at the current period of time. What did the world has changed? I'm trying to say like with us or against us at here. The only difference at here is the terrorist or the terror have been substituted by illiberal states or non-democratic states. Or if I go a little bit further, or the states that do not follow US guidance or directions. Or if I put it more specifically at here, is Trump's guidance or directions at here. Now, illiberal states, non-democratic states, well, there is not a universal kind of label at here or unified way to define what illiberal states are. But most of the time we can divide it into two kind of categories at here. It's one that has hold election but does not combine the core values of liberalism at here. For example, like the separate of the courts, rule of law, or the free press. And the other category that could be under the liberal states are what we can say the authoritarian or the totalitarian kind of regimes. Now, I just want to ask you one question. How many countries do you think that could be put under illiberal states out of 200 countries in the world? How many countries do you think that could be put under the category of illiberal states? Well, based on lots of different kind of institutions, like the Freedom House or the varieties of democracy, are saying that it is someone between 80 to 100 countries. Now, if we take 200 countries are the overall number of the countries of the world that we usually use at here, almost half of those countries have nothing to do with liberalism or democracy at here. Now, why am I bringing this out? If you're going to maintain this kind of frame of with us and against us, then you're going to fight almost half of the countries that's not going to be on your own kind of side at here. Now, there is a country that we usually categorize or classify this country as illiberal state is, one of the most representative country is China, People's Republic of China, right? Now, it's very kind of sensational kind of things that I actually saw last year on September 2025. It was during the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Plus meeting. Now, I'm going to talk about Shanghai Cooperation Organization later on. But at here, there was a kind of announcement from Xi Jinping saying that the 4 global initiatives. Now, before I go in to talk about the 4 global initiatives, I have to say that I'm not going to advocate this 4 global initiatives, or I'm not going to give any kind of value judgment on here, but trying to introduce what did the illiberal state of China actually mention about the global existential crisis and how to solve these kind of problems at here. It's the first they talked about the global development, global security, global civilization, and global governance. Now, the global development and the global security is the overall worldwide development of economic growth, and also political economic growth is all integrated in here. But the kind of interesting part at here is the global civilization initiatives. These civilization initiatives were actually focusing on the bond with the other side of the world that is actually trying to solve the problem of existential crisis, and mostly focusing on climate change issues or ecological degradation or biosecurity issues. And the last one, global governance initiatives, are talking about each state should have the equal right to play a role in global governance to solve this kind of problem. And the overall regime doesn't matter that much. They can cooperate and they can hang together. Now, I know lots of criticism followed this. Well, China, to maximize their state interests, are trying to become the hegemon, or so they're just using this catchphrase, it's trying to build national image. But the thing that was shocking me at here is, I didn't hear this kind of effort coming from the US or from the liberal states recently, trying to show the overall kind of directions and thinking about the global civilization issues at here. Now, the other kind of part that what we have to think about is the against us part is increasing its size and its scope. Shanghai Cooperation Organization is an organization that is the largest in this regional kind of part, especially in its scale and its population. Now, what I'm just trying to say is like all the countries that is joining this Shanghai Cooperation Organization right now are the Middle East countries. Also, some of them are coming in here, but China, Russia, and India, Pakistan, Iran, and Belarus. So they're expanding their political, economic, and security ties. And it's getting bigger. More and more observers are joining this. Why am I saying this? When the world is dividing by with us and against us at here, the other side is gathering together, and the size is increasingly, enormously, it is increasing its overall sphere of influence. It's not a time to really talk about actually what kind of state interest, how can we meet in the middle. I think the more important part at here is there's no time to solve the problem, which we are actually focusing on now these days, especially on existential crisis, which I'm going to talk about more in the second question, second exchange out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Jung. I agree. As someone at the UN, binary concept doesn't work, given the magnitude of existential threats whole humanity is facing. So we have to maintain the umbrella of universal multilateralism, and then we have to seek coalitional and competitive rule-making models within that framework. So now, Professor Ikenberry.
Well, I'll be very brief, and I agree with actually both of these comments. And what the kind of bottom line is that to build the next world order, there's going to have to be both universal cooperation, where the desiderata for participation is, can you bring something to the table? Are the problems that you can grasp and help solve? This is a kind of emblematic of this would be Obama's nuclear safety grouping that he held during his administration several years ago, where his basic question is, anybody who has a solution to this problem is invited to attend the meeting. So that kind of spirit of multilateralism, I think, is needed. But I also think you do need to find and leverage order-building capacity where you can have groupings that are dynamic, and particularly dynamic groupings I've found in world history are democracies working together. They have been the greatest rule makers that have been in the modern era envisaging a world of multilateralism. Some of that multilateralism pertains to making the world safe for democracy, but some of it is also more general, making the world safe. And I think you have to do both those things. And I think when you go back and look at the last time we had these great ideological divides, the Soviet Union, the United States, during the Cold War, it's interesting, if you look closely, there was cooperation. And on three particular issues, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, there was cooperation on nuclear stability. There was also cooperation between the Soviet Union and the United States and the so-called free world on food security. And then on smallpox, actually, the Soviet Union and the United States cooperated to find a solution for the problem of smallpox. And there was also tacit agreement not to directly fight each other. There's proxies, yes, but not direct. And studies of how this cooperation emerged across the Iron Curtain on these functional issues, the answer is the people from both sides looked at the issue as, and this is the term of art, a systemic risk. That if we don't cooperate on this, then all of our more narrow interests will be foiled. That is to say, at the level of keeping a systemic global system functioning, we've got to agree to keep that playing field stable, even if we know that with a stable playing field, we will compete for territory and for ideas between us. But it's a different layer of order, and you have to keep the most basic level, what is called the systemic risk level, safe, and that can get you to talk across borders.
I agree with you, and also Professor Kim Song-han's earlier point. Lack of political trust cannot be a reason for not having a dialogue on the need to manage much bigger risks. Because strategic arms control agreements came through when the Cold War tensions, mutual distrust between the Soviet Union and the US was the highest. But they agreed to talk and agree on the agreements to avert mutual risks. So I think that's what now US and China should do. With that, sorry to Professor Kim Song-han. I want to bring our discussion a little up again because our second part is back to what to do with our. This doesn't work. Something. Yeah. The question, bigger question, how we seek peace with the natural world. Although we all agree that bring unity or unity of purpose, more precisely, in the human world is an uphill task. But still, even miraculously, we bridge these triple divides into one human world, but this will not be enough to secure peace on the planet Earth, because unless we seek peace with the natural world, there will be no planetary peace. So I want to bring our dialogue a little up higher. And in this round, I think Professor Jung Jong-pil will go first.
Okay, now I'm in first in here. Okay, that's great. Let me just first go back to the exchange one kind of question, and I just want to make a kind of conclusion at there, and it also related to the topic that we're going to talk at here. Now, what is the solution then? Okay, this huge kind of division now. How can we meet in the middle? What is the common ground that U.S. and China can go together and have mutual coexistence at here? Several things why I was bringing out the liberal kind of states side at here, and why did I bring out this issue was there is a totally different kind of regime, the way of thinking, and the way that the overall mechanism is so much different, compare and contrast with the liberal states. Now, we are trying to say like there is a kind of a middle kind of point out there that we can meet in the middle. But if we want to meet in the middle, the first thing is like trying to understand the different part. Trying to understand the against us part. Instead of pushing that side away, or instead of to simplify this as dictatorship or authoritarian regimes, I think there should be a space to understand each other and trying to find the middle range where they can meet with each other. First thing that I want to talk about here is related to that. Is existential crisis issues. It's probably a way that we can meet. Now, existential crisis, So we want to say, well, there was lots of introductions about the bulletin of the atomic scientists. So actually, the Kyung University system selected this organization as the second Millen Peace Prize laureate. The reason for that is this organization actually paid a loss of more than 80 years. There was an effort trying to find scientific evidence out there, or trying to work for the public good of the overall human world out here. And they tried to let the overall world know the existential crisis. How far is it coming to us? Is it coming close, getting far away? How serious it is? And the doomsday clock is one of that kind of symbols that actually came out out there. First was 1947, like 7 minutes. And then when the hydrogen bomb came up, it became like 2 minutes. And then after that, the post-Cold War, 17 minutes toward the midnight of the ultimate kind of the crisis of the whole world, right? Now it's 85 seconds toward the midnight. What is that supposed to mean? Now, before I go any further, what is existential crisis? Is there a single kind of problem that a single country can solve this? We already talked about this: nuclear proliferation, nuclears, the risk of using nuclear weapons, climate change, ecological degradation, or biosecurity, or even the disruptive or destructive technologies. Now, all of these existential crises is coming to us rapidly. Now, my question comes out here: do we really understand, or do we have a profound understanding of these crises? If the overall world has this understanding of the crisis, I think probably they can provide an answer to what Professor Ikenberry just mentioned, that the world is not moving. If they really think this is a really existential crisis, then the world will move. Now, how to understand this? It's a very profound, and to understand this crisis, we need a very in-depth kind of understanding of this extremely complicated kind of crisis that is heading toward us. Only 85 seconds is left. Now, the climate change issue, we already have the full kind of experience. European countries, during the past 2 to 3 weeks, we see how many of the peoples have passed away, and the end of the power grid, and to change the overall kind of the environment for agriculture and everything like that. It's a huge threat to the humankind. And also, the nuclear issues out here. Now, even lots of countries are trying to say that if they can save their countries, why not bring nuclear weapons to our country for deterrence issues? So more and more countries are seeking for nuclear weapons. At the same time, the AI is providing us lots of opportunity, a brighter future, make us much more easy to access to a lots of different kind of informations at a very short period of time. You just click it, then you have the information. It writes everything for you. But if there is a possibility that it is misuses, then are we ready for that? Do we have the solution for this? If we do not understand what existential crisis is, it's almost impossible to find the solution for this. So what we really need at here is trying to connect humanity, nature, science, ethics, civilization, all of these, and having a more inextricably entwined kind of crisis, and have a more fundamental understanding of where is this crisis, what is this, how serious it is, how soon it's going to come to us. Now, I think US and China, there's lots of different kind of ways to meet in the middle, but I think that talking about these issues is not talking about sovereignty, national interest, maximizing, trying to be the hegemon. If there is no world, there's no hegemon. Even if you win this kind of war out there, there's going to be nothing left. So I think the two sides can meet in the middle by focusing on these kind of issues. And I think Korea could do also a very important role as a middle power between these two super ones. Thank you.
Thank you for reminding us the importance of understanding And understanding requires learning. We have to learn about the problems. And I think it also comes with a sense of urgency. Because I believe the real crisis we are facing is not to recognize the crisis as a crisis. We all talk about how serious existential threats are. But do we really believe from our heart, particularly leaders? So unless we perceive this as real threat and act on it with sense of urgency, we cannot change the reality. And also, thanks for reminding us about Beyond Peace Prize. By the way, Professor Ikenberry was one of the selection committee members who selected BAS as the institution who works for peace advocacy through science. Science-based advocacy for peace is critical because it's science-based. We cannot deny this, not as a reality. So we have to accept this as a reality and we have to act on it. Professor Kim Sung-han?
Okay, quite frankly, I didn't understand peace with the natural world before I came here. But now I can understand what it is. Thanks to Professor Chung and Professor John Ikenberry. About 20 years ago, until 20 years ago, if my memory is correct, we used to say environmental degradation or environmental problem when we try to talk about how, what kind of damages are being exerted upon the environment or the natural world. But probably since former Secretary General Boutros Boutros-Ghali began to use the word of human security, we began to use the word of environmental security rather than environmental problem. This shows the importance of Speech Act, if I may. I may sound constructivist, but the wording, how to coin the word, particularly the important threats or around us, we need to use the right word. So in that sense, I think, frankly, I prefer to use the word of security of the natural world rather than peace with the natural world, because I'm a kind of a hard security person. By the way, from the perspective of human civilization and a threat to humanity, we need to define crimes against humanity a little bit differently. If I'm, correct, crimes against humanity are defined as gross and systematic violation of human rights. But we need to add one more: human rights and the environment, or natural world. Gross and systematic kind of a violation of human rights and the environment. This should be regarded as crimes against humanity. ICC may take that word, or UN might take that word. Kyung University might take that word to enlighten many of others who tend to ignore, the importance of peace with the natural world. So in that sense, I think, this kind of effort is quite needed. And good news is that U.S. And China have not regarded environmental security as a real security problem, which means they can talk to each other about this issue, even though Trump administration appears to be an exception. And bad news is this is becoming more like a security problem. But at the same time, as a hard security person, we need to elaborate the concept of peace with the natural world from the perspective of environmental security, because it is an existential threat to human rights, human well-being, and humanity itself. So in that sense, I think we need to switch our conventional thinking toward this kind of a new thinking.
Thank you very much, and most welcome. Because, as you said, you are most recent convert to embrace national, natural security, environmental security, and I think it's different terms, but it's the same idea. And I love your suggestion to add crimes against the nature. And with that, I think also Professor Ikenberry has a lot to say, because 2 years ago when we engaged in workshop here, he suggested a very noble concept to enlarge responsibility to protect citizens to responsibility to protect global environment, R2PE. And I think R2PE is a great concept, is the environment, but also the earth. We have to find a way to put people and the planet, humanity and the planet Earth, front and center in our future discourse. Floor is yours.
Yes, very briefly, because I agree with what I've heard with my distinguished panelists, that this is a realm where we need to really work hard and begin to illuminate and articulate the nature of these threats, which are kind of diffuse and multiple and hard to grasp, and seem to be maybe future threats for our children or grandchildren. But the way we crystallize it, the way we talk about it, the words we use, and indeed using environmental security, can help bring people on board to see this as something that is not simply a boutique or a problem for the rich countries to worry about. It's there, and indeed poor countries and struggling people are often the first victims of planetary change and climate crisis. I would just simply end my comments by saying, going forward, we being citizens of the world, like Diogenes 2,500 years ago, need to be both humble and optimistic. Humble in the sense that we need to see ourselves occupying a fragile, lonely planet in a vast universe. And when you look at the Earth, which we were only able to do in the last 50 years with the so-called blue dot, Apollo photograph, turning the camera back on Earth, and you see this little blue dot with the oceans and the clouds and fragility. It looks beautiful, but it also looks like, oh my gosh, no one's looking after us. So that kind of humility that we are a species that are hanging on, if you will, a spaceship Earth, a fragile planet, endangered planet. It gives us a sense that we're in it together, and that all the struggles across nations and regions are secondary to the great struggle, to survive and to make a better life for us on a fragile planet. But secondly, a certain optimism. That there still is in the human condition a capacity for rationality, for science, for knowledge, for learning. I consider those enlightenment values that are being eroded today by fake news and pseudo-experts and what could increasingly be kind of artificial intelligence generated images. We saw some today. But the kind of finding the truth amidst all the noise and clouds of words and opinions that are proliferating on our social media platforms, we need scientists, we need experts, we need respect for authority, because not all opinions when it comes to the fate of the Earth are equal. And climate crisis was not something, as Trump once put in a media post, a conspiracy trumped up by China to attack Western capitalism. No, it's real. And we need respect for our scientists and for our experts to be able to tell us what's real, what are the stakes, and then it's up for the rest of us, the citizens of the world, to act. And that I think does take a certain amount of optimism that you can make a difference and that tomorrow can be a better place.
Thank you so much. On that positive note, your belief in the power of humility, optimism, and rationality. And I also believe in the collective wisdom of humanity whenever we face crisis. On that note, I'd like to conclude presentation and discussion part. Please applause for their efforts. And now, I'd like to move to question and answers with the audience. So I'd like to first get the questions from students. And given the time constraint, we will collect all questions at once. And then I'll ask each of our panelists to choose whatever question you want to answer. So first questions from students. Please raise your hands and please identify yourself first before you ask questions. Any volunteers? Who wants to break? Okay. I think, yeah. Please wait for the microphone.
Distinguished Professor Ikenberry, honorable panels, thank you for delivering a lecture on such an important and pressing issue on the global agenda. My name is Anna Moleva. I'm a first-year student at National Research University, Higher School of Economics in Moscow. And I have a question about scientific cooperation between the scholars of our two countries. As you have mentioned, it is a very important issue, and our scientists should cooperate in order to establish a better world order. But Russian students have several restrictions in going to the United States because of international sanctions. And sometimes building a bridge between our two countries is very complicated. So my question is, do you know whether there are some strategies or programs for Russian students and for American students so that we could make the dialogue between Moscow and Washington more effective and sustainable? Thank you.
Okay, thanks for the question. And second question? We'll collect all questions at once.
Hi, my name is Giovanni Sotaro. I'm from Central Connecticut. My question is also for Professor Ikenberry. Young people worldwide are the most skeptical generation of existing institutions like the UN, WTO, etc., yet also the most globally connected. Could youth-led movements be the actual engine that forces the fundamental mindset shift that you call for, more so than state leadership?
Thanks for the question. Third? Any volunteers? Maybe from Korean students? Yes, go ahead.
Hello. I'm Brian from Kyung University. Thank you for the amazing lecture. I also have a question for Professor Ikenberry. So AI as being the new fault line and reshaping military, economic, and information power faster than any post-war technology as of per now. Do you think that it reshapes and accelerates the collapse of the current liberal order, or could AI governance actually become the first real life test case for planetary scale rulemaking for as of human security, in your words?
Thank you for the question. And maybe one more question from students.
Good afternoon. Thank you, professors, for that educational and insightful lecture. My name is Jessica Riddock. I'm studying law at Strathclyde University. My question is as follows. The liberal international order has often been criticised for reflecting the interests and values of Western powers more strongly than those of developing countries. If this order is to be renewed rather than replaced, how should institutions such as the UN and international financial organisations be reformed to give the Global South greater influence in global rulemaking?
Thanks for the first round of questions. Although all the questions are addressed to Professor Ikenberry, but still, I want to give a chance to other panelists also to respond on any question you want to answer. First, Professor Ikenberry.
Well, these are great questions, and I'm not sure I can be all that helpful, but I'll give a stab at several of them, and my colleagues might want to try as well. On the question of Russia and the United States and students, it is a sad situation that a war divides our countries and makes it harder not just on governments to talk, but people are victims in a sense of the conflict, in that they become punished in effect because they can't go to other universities in other countries, and there are embargoes on students in the case of the United States from Russia, and there's a general kind of chilling of relationships at the level of civil society exchange, and that is a tragedy and a casualty of that situation. And I hope someday the floodgates will be open and Ukraine will be free and independent and safe, and Russia will be inside of its own borders and a respected great power, and our societies will do what they have done in the past, which is learn from each other and provide a kind of set of channels for our students to do the building block action of learning exchange. After all, knowledge is a feature of the human estate, not of individual countries. Math is not a Russian or an American subject. It's a global subject. All humans, we talk the same language in so many of our academic areas. So it's a natural area for cosmopolitan cooperation. So I hope that we can get back on track there. I'll leave the young people as a source for leadership, for change rather than state leadership. I think that the answer is yes, but I want to hear my colleagues talk about that. Maybe, Brian, on the AI, I think I would say AI is kind of the great frontier that's also an unknown frontier. It offers great promise and great peril. I spent a week out at NVIDIA in Palo Alto hearing about what NVIDIA is doing in their super chips that are powering AI, and I came away both amazed at the future that is ahead of us. It will be both a brilliant success and a horrible nightmare simultaneously. As I told my students in class, the modernity and technological society is both Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It's both a positive world historical development that is making people better off, learning more about who we are, medical research, cures for cancer. It's going to do wonderful things, just utterly phenomenal things, but it's also going to endanger us in other ways. And so the answer really is AI's impact on the liberal international order will be a topic for liberal international cooperation, one would hope. That is to say, finding a pathway forward that will bring out and create yield on the upside and prevent danger on the downside. And that's what global governance is. It's growing interdependence under conditions of industrial modernity. Global governance is encouraging the upside and guarding against the downside. And AI is the most recent version of that. I'll save Global South, but there's a lot of exciting dynamics unfolding in the Global South that will be very, very relevant to rebuilding the liberal order.
Thank you. Professor Kim Sung-han.
I have just two comments. First of all, when it comes to U.S.-Russian relations, I think President Putin lost a brilliant opportunity to improve relations with the United States before he invaded Ukraine. Actually, when I was working in the government or advising the government, my American colleagues and friends used to talk about how I use the word, I quote the word directly. We are thinking of the ways of driving a wedge between China and Russia, because China is a permanent strategic competitor for the United States. Russia is not. So now is a brilliant moment for the United States to embrace Russia, like Nixon did in early 70s, to drive a wedge between China and the Soviet Union. Probably there aren't, precise parallel kind of elements, but this is a very sober strategic consideration. So in that sense, I think Putin had better put an end to the war with the Ukraine as soon as possible. And with respect to the future of the liberal international order, which is not perfect at all, as you know, and also as our student has already pointed out, it has really strong kind of a backbone, anchored upon the West, at the expense of so-called the global South. I think one of the reasons for the failure or collapse, if I may, liberal international order, crisis is more appropriate word, is the strategic kind of a negligence of the global South by the US. In the meantime, China expanded its own sphere of influence in the global South. So one of the key homeworks for the US as well as the West, when they are really interested in kind of a re-establishing liberal international order, they need to kind of sophisticate their diplomacy toward the global South. Particularly, you have to deal with so-called the regional leaders of the global South, Brazil in Latin America, and India, Indonesia, and the Saudi in Asia, and Nigeria and South Africa in Africa. Key countries should be dealt with as equal partners so that you can demonstrate your willingness to embrace them when you are trying to reestablish liberal international order, hopefully after Trump.
Thank you. Professor Jung Jong-pil.
Yes. About the Russia and the U.S. issue, I also want to say one thing about this is it's really sad and unfortunate that just what Professor Ikenberry just mentioned about that the state leaders are actually blocking the overall kind of connections in the civil society between these two countries. There could be a lot of different kind of ways of thinking. Like we always talk about track 1 diplomacy and track 2 diplomacy, or track 1.5 diplomacy. Lots of civil society, academia, and there could be a lot of exchange that could solve the more fundamental problem between those two countries. I can also apply this to the US and China relationship too. Instead of thinking about most of the graduate students are a spy or they're trying to take those informations and send it back to their own countries, well, there could be. And they're actually just some of the kind of evidence is proving that, but still, that's not the overall, all of those graduate students. That's purely trying to do their academic works out there. About the Global South issue, well, the Global South issue, well, I'm just happen to be the Chinese expert out here, so I have to talk about China. But the overall, the relationship between China and the Global South has a very long history, almost more than 50 years that's going on, especially the African countries, Latin American countries, Southeast Asian countries. Well, it could be the extension of what we call the Marshall Plan or exploiting those kind of countries. Well, but still, we have to think about what does the Global South countries need right now. They need very much the infrastructure to develop. Now, that doesn't mean that if that countries or some of the countries are corrupted and we still have to kind of invest or kind of just, save those countries out there. Because I'm not trying to say that, but still, there should be a much more open kind of view, an inclusive kind of views, what those Global South countries really need. And how can we let those countries to abide by the rule of law, liberal international orders out there? How can we educate them, or how can we let them to follow these kind of orders instead of pushing them away or kind of ignoring that? Thank you.
Thank you. I agree with both Professor Kim Sung-han and Jung Jong-pil that I think we should no longer call Global South as Global South. We should call them Global Majority, as we discussed 2 years ago at Princeton, because their voices and their relative power to Global West and East is rising. So with that, although I failed miserably in managing our time, but I'd like to give one last chance for questions to the faculty. So maybe, yes. Is there any more students who want to ask questions? Okay, then maybe after Professor Kim Hyun, then final question by the student. Microphone.
My name is Hyun Kim. I'm an emeritus professor of political science department at Kyung University. Thank you for your insightful visions of a reformed international liberal order. I have a very good couple of memories of co-teaching, say, UN and global governance with Professor Ikenberry. In your lecture, you concluded you're talking by emphasizing some coalitions of some liberal democracies, as well as some optimism and power, and as a key to our shifting our global mindset. But however, given the severe erosions of multilateralism, and as well as some very disappointing, weak collective response to the global crisis, like a pandemic or climate change or a WMD threat. But my question is, how can liberal democracies, some realistically, cultivate and sustain this optimism among the public that is increasingly cynical about international cooperation?
Thanks for the question. The last question from the student. Oh, microphone.
Hello, my name is Tommy. I'm currently a media major in Kyung University. I'm a Korean, but also an American. And because of that, I feel increasingly divided between my personal connection to the United States and the growing skepticism towards its leadership and reliability. So I have a question to both Professor Ikenberry and Kim Sung-han Professor, due to your experience as a former national security advisor. I recognize that South Korea cannot easily reduce its security dependence on the United States under current conditions, but dependence can also become a strategic vulnerability when it limits autonomy or exposes Korea to sudden changes in American domestic politics. If so, how should South Korea reduce the risks of overdependence without weakening deterrence? And is the U.S. prepared to treat greater Korean autonomy, including closer regional cooperation with China and Japan, as the behavior of a stronger ally, rather than as a sign of disloyalty?
Thank you. We have two questions, above the ground and down to earth question. So Professor Ikenberry and Professor Kim Sung-han.
These are great questions, and I know we're out of time, so I'll just be very brief. But I do think on how do we reignite interest and commitment to multilateralism. I think that's kind of my challenge every time I wake up in the morning, and what is my answer to myself to that question? It's trying to defend the accomplishments of the last 50, 80 years that have been the most successful organizational projects for human betterment in world history. Since 1945, we've created a world, it's not perfect, and it doesn't include enough of the world that we've now talked about, the global south and those countries that are outside of that sphere, but it's created more security, more wealth, and more glimmerings of social justice than any other world order in history. So there's a lot to defend and to create the narrative that people's lives are connected to the international system. It's not just your neighborhood or your town or your state or your country, but your fate, your family's fate, your children's fate will be tied to how this larger system gets reconfigured. And so I think that's the best we can do. Maybe shall I yield the floor to, you want to do the second question, or, okay.
My answer will be brief. When it comes to Korea-U.S. Security relationship, we have to think about the relationship between deterrence on the one hand and strategic autonomy on the other. When I was working in the government, I was thinking of many options, if I may, to narrow the gap between deterrence versus strategic autonomy. One thing I had in my mind almost every other day was to improve ROK's so-called C4ISR capability. That is one of the primary reasons that many of Korean military officers, particularly generals, become armchair generals, depending excessively upon the United States. When there is a crisis, the US will do everything. We will just follow them. That kind of mindset of dependency is prevailing. But since early 2020s, we began to launch the satellites for ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. 5 satellites, and we will be launching maybe some more, including small satellites. Our target year is going to be maybe 2032 or 33 when we think about autonomy, real wartime OPCON control. Before then, I think it's going to be very kind of vulnerable and fragile. So that is one example. The reality is much more complicated than our kind of visions. So that kind of a dilemma is a constructive dilemma we have to overcome in a gradualistic manner. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I'd like to move to our concluding part. And please give your final words, maybe 1 minute each, starting from Professor Jung Jong-pil and reverse order to Professor Ikenberry.
Okay, now I just really wanted to follow Professor Ikenberry and Professor Kim. I hope that I could be the last one at here, but anyway, I'm going to start first. There's all the issues that we talked today, I think is very important and at the same time that we have to all consider to find a way to solve these kind of problems. Now, to find a way to solve these kind of problems, first things again, we have to understand where does this problems or crisis is coming from. Now, the crisis and the problems are coming, it's not that simple. It's not that kind of like a separate kind of tools that could actually help us. It's more interconnected, it's much more complex. And the most important thing is like trying to recognize these crises as ours. This is coming from human consciousness. I think that is the most important part that we should all not take it for granted, but trying to seek for, trying to understand, and trying to move it on to practice. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Professor Kim Sung-han.
Professor Joseph Nye, who passed away last year, left a very important phrase. Security is like an oxygen. You don't know the importance of it until you lose it. Today, I have realized a similar kind of context in which we can say peace with the natural world is like an oxygen. As a hard security person, I have to confess I didn't pay much attention to this kind of a subject for a long time, but since today on, I promise I will pay more attention to that. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, my last word is simply that over the last few years, certainly since the Trump administration, I found myself on the defensive as a theorist of international order, liberal international order. Professor Ikenberry, the world that you've theorized, that you've illuminated in your work over your entire career has disappeared. And then I go on to make the argument that, well, it's not entirely disappeared, and there's still a lot of interest in building back rule-based order that has a kind of purpose of creating progressive change in directions that's desirable for humans, broadly speaking. And I often get the response, Professor Ikenberry, I would like to live in your world too, but it's just not going to happen. It's gone and it's not coming back. And my reaction time and time again is, if everybody who had told me that would actually go out and try to make it happen, then it would be there, that there is a kind of latent hunger for a more decent world. The pessimism comes not from their own sense that they've rejected that world of the past, but that they have become discouraged that they can keep it going or bring it back. But it's a question of the power of ideas and the power of numbers. And I think the constituencies for this kind of order are there, including the global South, that doesn't want to live in Yalta world. They want to live in San Francisco world. And so I think the power of ideas and the power of numbers are there. And so we'll see if we can do it. But the latent capacity is there. Let's just make it happen.
Thank you so much. And today, I think we all agree that we have very lively and enlightening debates, not only on the hard security, geopolitical issues underground, but also I would call geophilosophical issues above the ground. And thank you very much for our panelists. And also, I think we have at least strong consensus on 3 takeaway points. First point is liberal international order is under severe stress and not perfect, but still, it provides the best possible or maybe least bad option for the better future for humanity. Second, we cannot wait for major powers to lead the way again. Middle powers, civil society, including academia and scientists like BAS, should fill the gap. The last takeaway is not trying is not an option. Because then if we don't try to do something, then nothing will change. Although the task facing us is uphill task, very tough, difficult. politically challenging, but still we have to try because this is Mother Earth we have. Failure means planet will be like that. So failure will not be an option. And we have to try for our succeeding generations, including students like you. So thank you so much. With that, I like to conclude today's lecture and discussion. Please give our panelists big applause. I really enjoyed your lively discussion on matchmaking.